Welcome everyone to Leadership Mental Health Fucking Matters Too with our special guest, Melissa Doman. Many of you are here today because you are leaders, whether you are advocates, consultants, corporate leaders at work. Many of you are educators, parents, or organizers in your communities. As leaders, we're often the ones that are creating a space to support other people's mental health. Sometimes we feel an expectation to keep a brave face at all times, and that can be hard because we're all human. And many of us also are navigating our own mental health conditions or other forms of neurodivergence like ADHD, autism. So, how do we protect our own mental health while caring for our teams and our communities and also using our power and our influence to make change in the world? To help us answer all those questions, we have Melissa Doman here today. Now I get to hype up my friend Melissa. On the screen here, we have a beautiful headshot of Melissa smiling with a kind of leather moto jacket and a cover of her book, Cornered Office: Why We Need to Talk About Leadership Mental Health. Okay, so Melissa Doman is a friend of mine, but I am going to share her official fancy bio. So, Melissa is an organizational psychologist. She's a former clinical mental health therapist, and she has dedicated her career to workplace mental health. She's also even written not one book, two books about this topic. So her first book is called Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work. Here's why and how to do it well. So this was about how to talk about mental health at work. And she followed it up with her second book, which is coming out, called Corner Office: Why We Need to Talk About Leadership Mental Health. She's spoken on a lot of big stages like South by Southwest, CNN, Vogue, NPR, BBC, and she also works with big companies that you've heard of. Melissa has one core goal: to equip companies, individuals, and leaders to have constructive conversations about mental health at work. And she calls this mental health at work conversational literacy. In addition to her books, she's also has LinkedIn learning courses. So you can go on LinkedIn and take her courses that are now in multiple languages. How cool is that? And so, Melissa, I just want to start by saying thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and do this free event for the community to bring your expertise to talk about this topic, especially now. It's more relevant than ever. So, thank you for being here with us.
Oh yeah, anything for you and for minds of all kinds. And there's no question about making time for spaces like this.
I learned from you that swearing actually has a positive mental health benefit.
Yes, it fucking does. So swearing has a lot of mental health benefits and it has a lot of physical health benefits too. So not only does it help us to increase our capacity to deal with all kinds of pain, physical, emotional, etc. It's also really helpful for catharsis, the releasing of repressed emotions. It's a great way to bond with people. And there have even been some studies showing that consistent cursing, where it's just embedded in everyday conversation, is actually a sign of intelligence. So people who curse are fucking smart. And cursing is I hate saying these words. Cursing is definitely part of the brand. And my husband says I use fuck as a comma. So this is definitely a colorful language safe container for everybody here. And when we're talking about mental health, I don't see how we can't curse. Don't want to offend anybody's sensibilities, but also everyone's a chronologically aged adult, and I think everyone will be okay.
Honestly, I love that fun fact. I remember you shared that with me and I was like, yes, okay, now I don't have to feel guilty when I swear
No,
here
I
and
wrote it
there.
in the book as
It's a
well.
sign of in,
I was like, by the way.
it's a sign of intelligence. Okay, let's just get right into it. So, this is
Let's
your
do
book,
it.
Cornered Office: Leadership Mental Health. What drove you to write this book and why now?
You know, honestly, a number of years ago, and this is pre first book, I was also part of the problem. I think that, until about 2018-ish, that I looked at leaders really like anybody else did. I was like, oh, this fancy leadership title. Surely they know better and they will do better and they can handle more. And, they need to just be here for us. I was part of the problem like anybody else because I was conditioned to look at people with leadership titles, regardless of the type of leadership role or the function they were in. And I looked at them as if they were something else and not as the same species as us. There's a person behind the title. They haven't always been a leader. And ever since that light bulb moment that went off for me in 2018, which was during a workshop when I was teaching leaders how to talk about mental health to their teams, and some of the attendees were like, it would be nice if you asked us how we even feel about doing this, or if we need support. And I was like, well, fuck me. I cannot believe I even didn't even think about that. I was so ashamed. And then in the years that followed, I did lots and lots of leadership development coaching and workshops with leaders, and I lost count of the number of leaders that would cry to me, who would tell me these stories because they didn't feel like they could say it to anybody else without being doubted. And, eventually I was like, I cannot participate in this narrative that has been created over such a long period of time that treats leaders in a way that does not enable them to succeed and serve others better. So I rage wrote 75,000 words about how we got here, why we're still here, and how to do things differently. But I just can't believe it's like the first that shocks me of the 8 billion people that are alive on this planet. But here we are, so that's where we're gonna go.
Leaders were coming to you. You said they're crying. What
Yeah.
what are those common challenges that leaders are facing right now? I mean, I think those of us here, we can probably guess, but would love to hear from your expertise. What are the common challenges that leaders are facing now?
Well, I think it's also good to have it validated, even if folks can guess, because there's such common themes, but then there's also ones that are very surprising. So, first of all, like mental health struggles aside, mental health condition struggles aside, neurodivergence aside, being a leader is hard. It's hard. And so when you are giving direction to people, when you have to manage certain things that other folks don't have to manage, there can be naturally higher stress levels. There can be higher levels of, worry and anxiety and irritability, or having trouble with shifting priorities, cognitive fatigue. That's just the gig in general. Now, when you add on top of that, if you are a leader in today's climate, there is, gestures to everything. It's not just leading in a very VUCA world, so volatile, uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous. I think C is chaotic. I need to sense check that. Um, it's not just that, but it's also that there's more expected than ever of leaders, and the patience and willingness for people to perform that way is going down. So the demands are going up, and the patience for those demands being met is going down. So there are so many leaders I work with that are literally hyperventilating about getting canceled. And these are the good ones, by the way. These are the good ones because there's a lot of leaders out there doing a lot of bad shit. And that will always happen. And I don't like to say that, but that's the truth. So the good ones are very concerned that if they say the wrong thing, they do the wrong thing, which on the grand scale of bad things, people's tolerance for leaders making mistakes is understandably very low. So the mental health struggles I see from them are really predominantly around feelings of worry, anxiety, sometimes depression. There's some anger in there, feelings of learned helplessness. Like it doesn't matter what they do, they'll always be seen as us versus them, and the bad guy because they're in a position of power. And even in some cases hopelessness because they feel like they can't enact change in a system that sometimes doesn't want them to and doesn't enable them to. So that's the short answer for what they've been coming to me with the last few years.
Let's just get very practical and concrete. People are feeling distress. Leaders are often unsure of what to say, like how to even broach this with their teams,
Yeah.
whether to say anything at all. So I know you wrote a whole book about that, but what guidance would you give to leaders who are here?
The first book, which I wrote during the pandemic, I had emailed my publisher and I was like, hey, I need to add like three more chapters based on all the shit happening right now. And they were like, yep, we understand. So there was actually an entire chapter at the end of it, basically talking about mental health during, challenging times. This is a fucking challenging time. So there are two things that leaders can do. So it's not just about creating a container to have those conversations for the team. You also have to humanize yourself as a leader to talk about how it may also be impacting you. Part of my work around leadership mental health is humanizing leaders, not just for the sake of role modeling for their team members, but also so their team members can understand that leaders only have so much capacity and they're not just there to lend their capacity to others. I'm a firm believer that, because every person in the workplace is a chronologically aged adult, which, not always the same as maybe cognitively aged, mentally aged, but there is nothing wrong. There's no rule against team leaders also showing up for team members showing up for their leaders. That is also allowed. So when it comes to all of this stuff going on, and I do think that having just like you had the agreements that we had at the beginning of this call about how conversations will be treated. I think if leaders are going to create the space for talk about the distress that's going on, there needs to be an understanding of the function of that conversation and what it's not going to be. Because you just never know where people sit in that spectrum and who unexpectedly could just be an asshole. So if a leader is going to bring that up to a group and say, I'm conscious there's a lot of stuff going on right now, we can talk about this and, support each other as a team, but division will not come into this space. Do we understand each other? And yes, that feels a bit like firm, but you got to be firm with these things sometimes. So, and really making sure that people understand the function of that. So we're going to talk about this to just bleh, to get it out, but then we're all going to talk about what we're going to do to manage that. Not just throwing words into the infinite abyss, but then each person being like, okay, I feel this way. I'm going to take care of myself this way, and so on and so forth. But also leaders need to explain how it's impacting them. Now, in my book, I talk about decide how you want to build your fence. Let me explain the metaphor. We don't want to go for an open playing field where everything goes as word vomit and people are like, I don't know what to do with my hands. Like, I'm not sure what you want me to do with this conversation. But we're also not trying to have an ironclad door. So I say build a fence, decide what you're going to let through, decide what you're going to keep out. Now, as a leader, if you want to talk about how things are impacting you got to do this based on your specific scenario. If it's a psychologically safe workplace, what you want to share, why you want to share it, what you want people to do with this information. It could be as simple as I'm feeling very anxious about what's going on because of X. If I seem a little more on edge, please don't take it personally. I'm having a tough time with what's going on out there because people will create assumptions, they will create reasons why you act the way you do. So, as a leader, there's an opportunity to concretely explain why you are feeling this way, how people should take that information, and what you're prepared to do on the back end to manage that. But what you share is up to you. And you can even say to people, I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing to let you know where I am in case, I start acting differently or depending on the rapport of the team, letting people show up and support you too. That is allowed to have a bi-directional support structure.
Interesting. So, encouraging leaders to be human and knowing that they don't always have to be the one giving support, but they can also receive support.
Yes.
We did have a question from someone who registered. That's kind of a follow up to this, which is how do you balance managing both up and down? How much to share about your own mental health or neurodivergence? Like, what should you or should you not communicate?
Well, there are two answers there. There is the interpersonal answer and there's the legal answer. Now, if you have a diagnosed mental health condition, if you have a learning disability, I'm very aware that our host talks about this a lot and is way more informed than I am about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I want to say here that you want to know, obviously, what your rights are in the workplace when you're making these sorts of disclosures, because I cannot sit here and say that when we talk about mental health or talk about neurodivergence, that every single person who hears this information will respond in the exact right way with sunshine and rainbows, because some people are hurtful and some people are closed-minded and some people are ridiculous. So the first thing I will say there, know your rights, know how you're protected, and think about what you want to share, as I mentioned before, why, who you want to share it with, what you want them to do with this information, and what is the outcome that you are looking for. So the way that I will take myself as an example. So I have generalized anxiety disorder and I have ADHD. So now I realize I am self-employed and that is a very different setup when I'm informing my clients or, anybody that I'm working with. But when I inform people about my anxiety or my ADHD, it's so they can understand why I communicate the way I do, why I react the way I do, my needs in those conversations so they can get the best out of me. So again, I understand as a self-employed person that that is a very different kettle of fish. But within the workplace, the goal isn't different. The goal is explaining, for example, if it's ADHD, let's say that you struggle with auditory processing, which I also do. So there could be an example where you're saying, "Hey, I'm typing this. I can't hear what you're saying while I'm talking because of my ADHD. Can just give me a second." So it can be, small things like that. Or I'm also very visual, where I'll say, "I'm not understanding what you're saying because of my visual needs with my ADHD. Please, can you share your screen?" So it can be simple things like that. I understand that in a leadership position, that can feel more high risk because lots of people are looking for any reason, even not legitimate ones, to doubt people in positions of power. And they've been historically taught to be fearful of this because being emotionally consistent, stoic, not having variations in behavior, these are prized leadership behaviors in ways that have become extraordinarily toxic. So when people, especially if they don't understand neurodivergence or mental health challenges, when they take that in a way that is wrong or unhelpful, you don't want to give people reasons to doubt credibility and ability. But what we're trying to do here with leaders is to show that leadership success and emotional struggle and mental health conditions and neurodivergence all exist in the same package and that they're not mutually exclusive. Let me give an example. I was speaking with someone once about, I don't even know what, and when we were talking about work, and when I had disclosed that I had ADHD, this person said, and I quote, "I never would have guessed that you had ADHD. You speak so clearly with such organized thoughts." And I said, "Well, why wouldn't I?" And she goes, "Well, I just, ADHD people are so all over the place." And I said, "Well, that seems like a very small-minded opinion, don't you think?" She got very quiet after that. But all that to say, when you're sharing this sort of information, you got to tell people why you're saying it and what you want them to do with the information, because otherwise, the minute you say things, the brain is a fast reactor and will just go blah, 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 blah. So just put structure into it because we cannot count on people to take it the way that we intend or necessarily to do. the right thing. Now, I know that was a long answer and there's so many nuances and so many caveats. It's because it's the truth. You need to take into account the workplace you're in, the job you're in. Is it a psychologically safe culture? Do you have um, accommodations within the workplace? Do you have the safety up and down? Lots of different factors to consider, but those are some things I would suggest to start. And scene.
You covered a lot. You covered a lot in that. Thank you for outlining that. Structure is the word that stood out to me.
Yeah.
I encourage neurodivergent people to take some time to reflect on that structure that you mentioned. What is your goal? What's the outcome you're hoping for with sharing any type of personal information? And then what's
And sorry, I don't mean to interject. If I don't say it, I forget it. I wrote a lot of that in both of my books. So, for anybody that chooses to get one, either whatever, not only are there scripts in there, but there are also all of these reflection questions that are talking about exactly what I'm saying, of all of this quote back end prep to do and to think about and consider and plan before having these conversations so you actually feel prepared going in.
so buy Melissa's book, people.
Oh God.
Buy the book.
Listen, the only reason the first one is behind me is because my husband forced me to, because you know all those authors who are like, hey, do you know I wrote a book? Do you know I wrote a book? And I'm like, shut up. So you can thank Matthew Frank for forcing me to put it behind
It's
me.
okay. That's why I'm here to hype you up because I know it's
Thanks,
always
girl.
easy. It's always easier to promote other people. Um, I loved how you talked about self-advocacy and communicating our needs. Every single person in the workplace has needs because we're all human, whether or not you have a
Yeah.
disability or neurodivergence or mental health condition. And we also don't have to justify. We can always communicate our needs, whether or not we want to disclose anything about ourselves.
Oh,
Um,
100%. You can talk about those needs without disclosing anything related to a diagnosis or a mental health condition. Again, not that it's something to be ashamed of, but just if the situation doesn't feel safe, it can just be, hey, I can't listen and type at the same time. Can you just give me a second? Or I can't understand without the visual. Can you show me a visual? These are some ways to get those needs met without using the medical terminology.
mhm. Absolutely. All right, I'm looking at the time. We have 10 minutes left. We had a number of audience questions that came in
Yeah.
through the registration form. So I'm going to ask one of them and then open it up for people who are here live to ask questions. I'm just going to read the question verbatim.
Yeah.
What are some proven ways to reach HR and people officers in order to propose mental health awareness programs?
You know, I find the wording of that question very important, and here's why. That person said, what are some proven ways? Now, what that makes me think is, has this person encountered resistance? Has this person encountered a lack of buy-in, pushback? Because proven ways to me sounds like they've tried in different ways and people are just not getting the memo. So what I would want to know first is, has this person met resistance? And more importantly, why? So the approach that I tend to take, because my clients are businesses, as you mentioned. So for me, when I talk about this with businesses, I say to them, this is not optional. This is a critical business priority. And, the data is there. This is not about the bleeding heart case. This is not about anything else that people can negotiate and turn down. And if you want to sound like an ardent capitalist, which is not my favorite, talking about mental health is just smart business. Like how could you not? In addition to the fact that it's necessary, the right thing to do, and people need to do it to survive. What other case do you need? So if this person is meeting resistance, and, I tend to use the golden rule from Stephen Covey, communicating to people how they need to be communicated to, not how you would want to be communicated to. So if the people function is very data driven, if they're very ROI driven and they need to see stats on stats on stats, well, then it becomes, here are the statistics. How many people work in this company? Are we an exception? No, we're not an exception. And talking about mental health is a critical business priority. Here are the reasons why. Here are the citations. Here are the receipts. People are saying in the Pulse survey that they want to have these conversations, like bring irrefutable receipts. So it doesn't just, because there are plenty of companies, unfortunately, that will just take, oh, we want to talk about mental health as like, oh, it's going to open a can of worms. Oh, it's going to do this. Oh, it's going to do that. And the way I would tend to approach it, which is how I've built my whole business, is that the goal isn't just a mental health awareness campaign. The goal is to equip people with the skill set and the language they need to talk about mental health. That's the next step, is that we've been doing mental health awareness for so long that yes, part of the program should be about building awareness, but it's also about building capacity and ability for these conversations. So if it was me, I would pitch it as critical employee development and critical leadership development because people need to talk about it. So why not talk about it in an effective way? Again, these conversations are multi-directional. They can go peer to peer, they can go leader to team member to leader, HR to other folks, and etc. So to me, it's a critical education endeavor beyond just building awareness. So that's the approach that I've taken with all my clients, and I haven't lost anybody yet.
Mm, that's great. Yeah. I mean, and beyond awareness and talking about it, the next step, and I know a lot of people who are here today, is like beyond just talking about it, using our power and influence
Oh
in
yeah.
our own sphere of influence as leaders to make changes in our organizations and in our
Hmm.
communities to create a world that is supporting mental health of people. Because when so
Hmm.
many people are struggling with mental health, this is
Yeah.
not an individual failing. This is
No.
because of the conditions in our organizations and in our society that are not supporting the well-being of humans, which is why your book is so important because leaders, we need to take care of our own mental health so that we can show up and so that we can make a difference.
And to add to that, one of the things I talk about in the book is not just, for example, humanizing leaders. You also need to build support structures. So leadership peer communities internally, making sure that mental health is included in professional development for leaders, making sure that leaders also use the employee assistance program, making sure that they're not just recommending the resources to their teams, but also using it for themselves. So you could even have a leadership mental health ERG. I mean, all the things we do for employee mental health, there is no
Yes.
reason not to do it for leaders just because of a job title. It's silly.
Yes, absolutely. All right, I'd love to hear audience questions for folks that are here live. So if you have a question to share, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. And so
I,
that,
I do see a hand
oh,
raised
good.
from Erica.
Well, that was my question. Um, the question about that. And I'm an ADHD specialist coach, and like there's an interesting conflict that you're talking around. You've been talking around the whole time, but like if leaders are extremely afraid of being canceled,
Hmm.
and then which I totally agree with, and then we're asking them to humanize themselves and
Hmm.
like step forward and for example say like I have ADHD, like
Hmm.
there's a in a workplace environment that isn't feeling safe, that's just a very
Not
dangerous,
possible.
it's a very dangerous thing to ask them to do and probably
A
not
hundred
possible.
percent.
And then that's where my question comes from, right? Is that
Hmm.
then you walk in the door and say we need to train, we need to, we need to train your workforce to be more
Hmm.
neurodivergent affirming. Like
Hmm.
the place that needs that is the place that's going to say, well, I don't want to encourage people to ask for accommodations.
Oh, I'll be very honest with you, Erica. And I said this in both of my books, and Margot knows I love answering these questions
Yeah.
because it's the fucking truth. And I will never stray from this guidance. There are some workplaces and some teams where we cannot have these conversations because those workplaces and those teams are saying who they are, what they will give, and what they will not give. So, in some, emphasis on some cases, when people can afford, in every sense of the word, to go to proverbial greener pastures, hopefully they're able to, but if they're not, and they can't leave that job, and it is not a psychologically safe place to make those disclosures, just as Margot was talking about getting needs met, if you cannot get those needs met at work, but you can't leave that job, then it comes down to getting those needs met elsewhere outside of work if they do not have another option. Because I am not twisted about the fact that there are some companies, teams, and even industries where this conversation will never happen. So the goal is to get it happening in enough places where the places that it doesn't happen becomes the minority. To say it'll happen everywhere with every team and every company is a ridiculous thing for anybody to think. So that 100% I agree with you. You are not wrong. And that's why taking nuance into these cases and individual circumstance is absolutely critical.
Well, I also want to thank you. I want to say I took notes because I mean you're totally right. You read into the question, right? Proven ways. It comes from someone who's gone to a company and said, "Are you interested in training your people?" and heard, "Oh no, I don't want to encourage them to ask for accommodations. They should suck it up." And you're like, "Oh my God, just this is exactly what I'm
I
fucking
had a
talking about,
feeling
though."
the word proven. I was like, this person has encountered resistance.
But, of course. And I think I got a lot of good stuff back from you in your answer, which is, to say it isn't optional. And, even if you don't know that your people are leaving because of this, people are leaving because of this. And so you really do you have to do the work to make it a place that's better.
hmm
Some people will bite and some people won't. But you said some really good
Correct.
things about it.
I'm happy it
Um,
was helpful. Yeah, I think it's important to be honest about this because there are some people, and I understand they're trying to help. I understand they're trying to do something good. But when it comes to stuff like this, I think setting goals that are realistic as opposed to uh, different forms of binary extremes is the goal because we can't we just can't say that we're all gonna get to that place. There's too many variables. So
yeah.
try to get it in as many spaces as possible.
One key takeaway, uh, other than my personal ones, was when you share something in a work context, include the reason why you're sharing it and the outcome you're
Yeah.
trying to influence by sharing it. Um, that's a really good rule of thumb generally, but especially in a workplace context. I love the way you said it. You said, "I don't know what to do with my hands." People say, "I don't know what to do with my hands now," which is very funny.
I have to admit I took that from Talladega Nights. So I can't take credit for that. I did see a question in the chat. Do you have any tips on navigating these conversations in a virtual workplace? Very good question. Now, it really depends on the medium in which you're doing it, whether it's a live meeting like this, synchronous communication, asynchronous communication, and it also depends on the type of conversation it is. So whether it's, just talking about general struggle day to day, if you're having like a flare up for a mental health condition, or if your cognitive capacity is challenged, more so in general, more recently, it really depends on the kind of conversation it is, what the outcome is. Now, obviously speaking, in a live setting is often better so that there are more opportunities to explain, to clarify, etc. But again, in a written medium, statement of intention, huge. There is no tone in written communication, but people often assume that there is. So say what you're saying, why you're saying it, even if you want to explain, I feel blah as I'm saying this. You just want to be as descriptive as possible and what you're trying to achieve by sharing it. But in a virtual environment, and I'm so conscious of time, there are lots of different tips for synchronous and asynchronous communication. But those are some to get you started.
All right. Christine has a comment in the chat that wraps this up very well. She said, mental health is hard or scary to talk about, whether you're for yourself or holding space for others, but it is still important to make space for it. Very well said, Christine. If you are wanting to learn more about how to talk about mental health in the workplace, I recommend Melissa's first book, Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work, and here's how to do it really well. And she also has a LinkedIn Learning course all about this. And it's very practical. There's like actual scripts and bullet points. And as someone myself with ADHD, it was easy to read. And Leadership Mental Health, her new book is coming out. Cornered Office, Why We Need to Talk About Leadership Mental Health. Melissa, what is the date that it will be launching?
February 24th.
February 24th. The
Yeah,
launch party is in March. That's what it is.
correct. Yes.
Okay, the
Yes.
launch party is in March, but it is now available for pre-order, so you can learn more about the books and about Mel at melissadoman.com. And if you want to learn more about Minds of All Kinds, mindsofallkinds.com. Thank you all for being here with us today. And more importantly, thank you for the work that all of you here are doing to influence and make change in your organizations and in our communities.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming.